Bodily autonomy has been a controversial issue within the United States since the Revolutionary War. Emerging in times of struggle such as landmark court cases, wars, and global pandemics, questions over who has the right to dictate what happens to our bodies have arisen time and time again. Over the last 10 years, our political climate has become increasingly divisive, with loud concerns coming from all points of view. We must ask ourselves how diverse issues such as reproductive rights, gender-affirming care, and vaccine mandates interact with one another, and where the line is drawn between government and individuals.
Does the federal government have the right to make decisions regarding women's reproductive rights? Throughout history, there have been significant challenges and setbacks to this very idea. From aspects like birth control and abortion, women's reproductive rights have been consistently fought for and against across the political spectra. The first strike on abortion was made at the Connecticut General Assembly in 1821, banning the practice after quickening, the first detected fetal movement. Furthermore, the Comstock Act was passed, making it a federal crime to distribute information regarding contraception and abortion access. As stated by a PBS article, this was quickly opposed by activist Margaret Sanger, who opened the United States' first birth control clinic, the first major precursor to the Planned Parenthood Federation. In 1972, the Supreme Court case of Eisenstadt v. Baird rejected a law that would ultimately have made it illegal for the distribution of contraceptives to unmarried couples. This was one of the first major steps in establishing a precedent of privacy. According to Oyez, another Supreme Court case that quickly came about in 1973, Roe v. Wade. This case affirmed a woman's right to choose to have an abortion within the first trimester of pregnancy. This was recently overturned in 2022 with Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization, in which the majority opinion cited that the Constitution does not protect a woman's right to an abortion. As we can see from the blatant back-and-forth policies established regarding female reproductive rights, the issue is highly controversial on many fronts, and this controversy is reflected in a survey conducted among Penn State students and faculty. In this survey, we found that 80.3% of our sample disagreed with the notion that the federal government should have the right to make decisions regarding female reproductive rights. This is contrasted, however, by the mere 53% who disagreed that spouses should have that same right over their female partners. This represents a gray area in the public's belief of who should be able to make decisions regarding a woman's bodily autonomy. Throughout history, there have been many acts and Supreme Court cases demonstrating the differing liberal and conservative ideals that have impacted female bodily autonomy in the United States.
When arguing about the issue of bodily autonomy, voters must ask themselves, does the government have the right to control or limit access to gender-affirming care for citizens? When people think about gender-affirming care, the first thing that typically comes to mind is transgender people. Trans people have been present since the beginning of America, with the existence of two-spirit people being documented in Native American culture. But the 1900s is when officially gender-affirming care really started to emerge in the U.S. Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld opened the Berlin Institute for Sexual Sciences with the help of others. He would later administer the first hormone therapy for his patients. He was named the father of transgender medicines. And as of recently, in November 2023, 14 states have passed legislation banning or limiting access to this care, and many others are considering the legislation. Gender-affirming care doesn't just include transgender surgeries. It also includes hormone therapy for menopausal symptoms, plastic surgery, and breast reductions. Dr. John Peter Metter performs the first cleft palate operation in the U.S., an early form of facial reconstruction for soldiers with traumatic injuries, bringing plastic surgery into the American mainstream. The regulation of gender-affirming care would restrict access to all of these services, and there will be a decline in mental health for patients. According to the Trevor Project's 2019 National Survey on LGBTQ mental health, 54% of transgender and non-binary youth reported seriously considering suicide in the last year, and 29% made a suicide attempt. Gender-affirming care has been shown to decrease suicidal ideation and attempts in transgender individuals, along with social groups, familial support, and the reduction of discrimination. On the other hand, there's been an ongoing debate whether trans athletes should be able to compete in sports. This issue is very split among Democrats and Republicans, with 85% of Republicans supporting the requirement for trans athletes to compete on teams that match their sex at birth, while 30% of Democrats support this, according to a Pew Research study in 2022. The duality of this issue and the misconception of what gender-affirming care really means leads to the deepened political polarization and the undermining of people's rights to their own bodily autonomy. In the survey we conducted among 117 Penn State students, 36.8% of students support the government ability to restrict the participation of transgender athletes in sports, while 28.2% of students in our survey disagreed, while 35% of Penn State students were neutral on this issue. This illustrates the conflicting ideas between voters, highlighting the broader implications of this issue at the national level.
Traditionally, the issue of bodily autonomy has been skewed by the media to be thought of as a liberal issue. Yet over the last 5 years, conservative voters have become increasingly concerned over the issue of vaccine mandates. So we must ask ourselves, how did the issue of bodily autonomy changes when others are affected by a personal decision? Vaccine mandates are not a new issue in the United States, stretching back to the Revolutionary War. George Washington mandated that the Continental Army be inoculated against smallpox to prevent its deadly spread from ravaging the army. The first laws mandating vaccines for civilians were instituted in 1905 in Massachusetts to fight the spread of smallpox. These regulations were challenged in the Supreme Court in Jacobson versus Massachusetts. Jacobson was challenging for his right to refuse the smallpox vaccine, citing a violation of his 14th Amendment rights. The court ruled in favor of Massachusetts, setting the precedent that vaccine mandates are constitutional because vaccination tackles the issues of public health and the common good over individual rights. A similar issue was discussed in the specific context of schools in Zucht versus King in 1922. The court ruled that schools could deny attendance to students that failed to present proof of vaccination. These court cases have served as a precedent for vaccination-related issues for over a century. Since the late 1990s, all 50 states have laws enforcing vaccination requirements for students in public schools, although many offer spiritual and philosophical exemptions for students who choose not to get vaccinated. The COVID-19 pandemic brought this issue to the forefront of American consciousness, with vaccine mandates for federal workers rolling out in response to the rapid spread of the disease. However, increased regulations and public spotlight have actually caused vaccination rates to drop. The CDC reports that non-medical vaccine exemptions for kindergartners has increased to an all-time high 3.4%. This may not sound like a lot of kids, but this decrease has caused many states to drop below the vaccination rates required for herd immunity. In the 2024-2025 school year, only 10 states had the 95% vaccination rate required for herd immunity for the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. This corresponds with recent minor measles outbreaks across the country, some of the first we've seen in the last 30 years. Herd immunity is a protection for those who cannot get vaccinated, not a blanket excuse for why healthy individuals choose not to. The security of herd immunity will soon disappear if we do not make a change. Vaccine mandates are a tool to maintain this standard of health. Overall, public health is an imperative issue to address and is well within the State Department's right to enforce over personal liberties, just like the violation of a speed limit.
Throughout history, the subject of bodily autonomy has remained at the forefront of public controversy. From areas such as female reproductive rights, gender-affirming care, and vaccine mandates, there has never been a clear and public consensus on how these issues should be treated as a whole, often politicized into the parties that support them. Bodily autonomy affects each and every one of us, so society must consider who controls their bodies and how these decisions affect others.